In this video, we're going to talk about recovery from narcissistic abuse. And we're going to do it the nice way and then the slightly darker way. Now, the darker way is necessary. The nice way is necessary. The darker way is necessary. The very nice and very gentle way is very necessary in the beginning. Then as the video progresses, it will match the level of recovery that you're at. So if the video gets too dark or too intense, just switch it off because you're not ready for that level yet. But everybody needs the first level, which we'll begin with now. So at the first level of recovery, what you need, what the client needs is a lot of validation and a lot of feeling heard and feeling seen and a lot of support and plenty of encouragement that what has happened is not their fault. They will be in a state of self-recrimination and guilt. A lot of these will be messaging through from the narcissist, and it's the narcissist imprint that's running inside of their head that's saying, you failed me, I told you were a bad person, that's why the relationship is broken down, that's why you've betrayed me, that's why you've abandoned me. So there's a lot of heavy emotional manipulation that you, or if you're a therapist or a coach, the client will be dealing with in the very first phase. So the kind of feedback that they need in the very first phase is very, very gentle. It's very validating, and they need to feel heard and seen and understood because they've just spent presumably an extended period of time with a person who wouldn't hear them, wouldn't see them, and refused to understand them. I do highly recommend that you seek out the help of a qualified therapist to help you through this, and it needs to be a therapist who understands narcissistic abuse, narcissistic personality disorder, and narcissistic abuse recovery, and the sort of the PTSD and the complex post-traumatic stress that can arise from narcissistic abuse. If in the meantime you're working on your own, focus on becoming emotionally regulated, get on top of your health, get on top of your sleep, get on top of your diet. You cannot just live chaotically and spontaneously. You will need to live with inside of a disciplined structure that brings you back to a sort of a baseline state of feeling calm and stable and sane. So you want to live semi-protectively. You want to protect your peace for that period of time when you're in the initial phases. Once you've gotten through the initial phases of recovery and you start to feel more emotionally regulated and the emotional flashbacks have slowed down. If you want a course for recovering on emotional flashbacks, we have a free one. If you just search Fortress Mental Health Protection on YouTube, it helps you to recover from the type of post-traumatic stress and emotional flashbacks that you can get in narcissistically abusive relationships. So when you won't have eradicated your emotional flashbacks with the course, but you will reduce their intensity and you will reduce their frequency, and you'll be able to see them coming, and you'll be much more able to cope, you'll be more resilient. At the next point, we need to come to a sort of understanding psychologically of what's going on. So we work with the body first. You want to deal with the somatic state first. You want to feel good, you're sleeping well, you're dieting, you're exercising, you're staying away from alcohol and drugs, and even hopefully prescription drugs as well, and you feel strong in your body. At that point, we need to go up into the head a little bit because you do need to understand what's actually happened. And this is where it can be a little bit dark and a little bit challenging for people, but I think it's very necessary. In order to understand what you've experienced at the hands of somebody who is in the cluster B, they're a narcissist, a psychopath, emotionally abusive, they could have a diagnosis of borderline, they could have a diagnosis of histrionic, it could be through alcohol dependency, whatever it is. Emotional abuse is emotional abuse. At that point, you need, or you would benefit from trying to see the world through that person's eyes, but you can't do that straight away. It's a necessary part of the recovery process. And what that means is you go to a somewhat dark place. You have to be able to imagine doing to somebody what this person has done to you, so that you're not locked into a binary of being like, that person's the predator, I'm the innocent victim, and I have no understanding of why they would do what they did. and I have no understanding of why they did what they did to me in the individual history and the individual story of my situation. And the way around that is a thought experiment where you allow yourself, preferably with a therapist, to go there philosophically and say, can I imagine what it would be like to target somebody and leverage their love and their loyalty for me against them in order to imprison them, to entrap them, to manipulate them, to exploit them, to extract resources, time, attention, love, money, sex, power, access, whatever it was. Can I imagine what it would be like to do that to a person? And the reason why you want to be able to do that is that's actually an exercise in empathy, which means that you can effectively map another person's experience. You can simulate another person's subjective experience of what they were doing with varying degrees of effect. Obviously, we're not psychic, so you can't do it perfectly, but just being able to go there inside of your mind is going to massively help your healing process, provided you've already established your level 1 foundationals. And then we move to the next level, which is even more challenging again. As I said in the beginning, only stay with the video as long as you feel like it reflects what your level of recovery is up to. If things start to get too difficult or they get too upsetting, just switch the video off, walk away, check in with your therapist or your coach, have a conversation about it, and then you can discuss with another human being who's a professional, who's boundaried, who knows you, what this video brought up for you. It's probably the most responsible way of doing it. At the next level, we need to take a look inward in a dispassionate and somewhat clinically objective way of saying, okay, how did this relationship come to pass? What was it that was latent in me that was attracted to the difficulty, the challenge, the pain, the suffering, the sense of being trapped in that relationship? Now, if people are not recovered and they've not done that sort of recovery work, they're not emotionally regulated, they don't feel safe inside of their own bodies yet, this could be, if you do this too quick, if you're a therapist or a coach and you do this too quickly with a client, you could potentially ruin their entire healing process. You could put them off therapy permanently. You would be doing them a great disservice, and you would be doing their narcissistic abuser a service. So don't fall prey to the idea that we need to rush to this. It's on a person-by-person basis, a case-by-case basis that you do this. In order for the person to look internally and say, what was latent in me that would accept abuse, that would live with abuse, that could get into a covert contract with a narcissistic abuser and start to feel like this is something that I wanted is a challenging word here, because we're talking about unconscious drives, let's say felt driven to co-create with this other human being. What was it in me that wants to co-create this with another human being? Again, if your response to that is anger, rage, and just like absolutely nothing, that's an outrageous question, switch the video off, take a chat with your therapist. We do need to eventually go there, because that's the only way to recover fully from emotional abuse, and it's the only way to ensure that it's not going to happen again in the future. Mapping this is done with curiosity, sense of humor, and compassion. We have to sometimes even philosophically change our worldview. We might think of ourselves and other human beings as completely rational creatures making rational decisions when we evidently are not. Some of our decisions are rational. Many, if not most, are not. They're rooted in unconscious drives. Here's a little philosophical coordinate to throw into your coaching or therapy session. What's the greater drive? The drive for pleasure, the drive for happiness, or the drive for safety? I would suggest, if we consider the input of evolutionary biology and the input of evolutionary psychologists, that the drive for safety trumps all other drives. Your genes don't need you to be happy particularly, but they do need you to survive and procreate so that the genes can move forward into the future long after you're dead. Why am I mentioning safety? Because there is a safety and a predictability in emotionally abusive relationships, particularly for those of us who were raised in an environment where we were not allowed to express our needs, where we were not seen, where we were not heard, where we were forced to put aside our own needs and our own development and our own growth, our own beingness, for the needs of tyrannical, self-serving and self-centered parents, or other primary caregivers, or potentially school, or potentially church, or potentially culture. Sometimes these things can leave imprints from adolescence. You might have been raised by not perfect but good enough parents, but then found yourself in situations in your adolescence where you're in a cult-like tyrannical scenario and you felt like you couldn't escape it, and so you adapted to it, and that adaptation stayed with you as a survival strategy. These are the things that have to be explored, but they're darker and they're further along the path. I'm doing a short video on this because I want to introduce the idea to people that we start with foundations. You have your white belt, your yellow belt foundations. You can't skip them. You can't miss them. You must feel safe first. You must be heard. You must be validated. Your suffering must be seen by somebody. And you need to be held in a very yin and nurturing space until you feel, okay, I'm calm enough to think. Because if your body's in alarm mode or you're just riddled with guilt and shame, you can't think, you can't process the experience. Then we take our mind into other places so that we can have a higher level view of what's happened to us, so that we can understand it better and so that we can really authentically move on. Why am I talking about this? Because if you've stuck with me to this part of the video, I'm concerned with what's happening in this space in therapy generally, in coaching generally, and in the space of narcissistic abuse therapy particularly. I think my gut feeling, my instinct is that people are doing certain types of therapy, they're doing certain types of coaching work, and they feel they're progressing, but they're not. And it's because they're missing essential components. Allow me to presume to say somewhat dogmatically, I think there are steps, in my personal belief, there are steps that you have to walk. They can't be avoided, that you have to go through, perhaps multiple times, perhaps over months, in order to make authentic recovery and not get into this type of relationship again. I'll leave you with one final dark and difficult question to ponder. Again, if you've come this far, this is by your choice. It's because you think or you feel that your recovery has led you to a place where this is safe for you. And it comes from a more of an Alfred Adler style perspective. The last question for this video. What would you lose if you recovered fully from the narcissistically abusive relationship and it was part of your past and you never got into another one again? So this question, said another way, is if you were successful in recovery from narcissistic abuse, what would you lose? And what are you frightened of losing if you lose that? You can journal on this, you can work on it on your own, but as I said in the beginning, I prefer you did that with a qualified therapist, somebody who has some experience in this particular field. I'm going to come back to this theme, but I think that's enough for today. Ladies and gents, thank you very much for your time and your attention. Please like and subscribe and do all the things. This week, we have a sale on the website, and you can go there and avail yourself of that at your leisure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'll speak to you soon.